Happy Saturday. Welcome home. So, like I said earlier, my name is Chris Gagné. I am an Agile coach, and I'm also a meditation teacher. I am studying in a lineage of authentic meditation teachers whose teachers go one by one back 2,500 years all the way to the Buddha. So I can look at my teacher, and he can look at his teacher, and that lineage gets traced all the way back. And Agile is kind of like mindfulness applied at work. Like there's this real kind of zen to it, and it's kind of no wonder that a lot of what we've learned from Lean is coming from Japan, right? And so we're beginning to see some overlap. And as a coach, I'm seeing overlap between mindfulness, meditation, and Agile constantly. And so I wanted to share some of those highlights with you because I think they really drive home why this is so important for our modern world. And so my talk tonight is about the 3 key benefits of meditation and mindfulness for people in knowledge work environments like us. So these are environments where you're paid for your intelligence, you're paid for your knowledge. So normally I have handouts. I forgot them tonight, so forgive me, but they're available on my website, and I'll share that with you tonight before I leave. So what is the first key benefit of mindfulness and meditation in the knowledge work environment? How many of you have heard of something called the Yerkes-Dodson Law? It's kind of an unusual psychological theory. Okay. So the Yerkes-Dodson Law describes, and it's well over 100 years old now, and it's got good science behind it showing that this is true. It describes a relationship between physiological arousal, and I mean stress, I mean like that tension, that cortisol reaction, right? And your performance. Now, for a simple task like, I don't know, picking fruit or hoeing or farming or moving bricks around, what do you suppose is the relationship between physiological arousal and performance? Any guesses?
It improves it?
Right. That's right. So when you've got a simple task, particularly a simple task involves a lot of physical movement and activity, the more physiological stress or arousal that you're under, the greater your performance up to a plateau, right? So that's why when you get all crunked up, you go to the gym, you're in like 400 milligrams of caffeine, you're like, yes! You're that warrior mode, right? Well, perfect. That's what that's there for, right? Just don't blow out your heart, please. But the work we're doing in knowledge work environments is quite different, right? It requires a lot of cognitive processing. So would we suppose that that relationship would look the same? Not at all. It's actually this inverse U-shaped curve, right? So if you're asleep, you're not getting a lot done. You're like, oh, this is great. I'm lazy. I'm chilled out. I'm relaxing. I'm not getting much done, right? And then you get this peak arousal, just this sweet spot, neither too tired nor too wired. You're just like this flow state almost, right? That's your peak performance. And then beyond that, you start getting stress and anxiety and panic, and your performance drops to the floor. And this has been proven time and time and time again. And it's, for us who work in the space, it's obvious to us. Now, I have a hypothesis that managers haven't updated their business operating system. Simple tasks have made up the majority of human endeavors since beginningless time, right? It's only now in this knowledge work environment that we're beginning to see, hey, we're using our thoughts more. Running away from that saber-toothed tiger isn't going to help. It's going to take the blood from our brain to our extremities. That's not what we want, right? So I think meditation does a couple things. I think meditation is an indispensable part of any sincere practice of personal growth and inquiry. And I don't think it's really possible to go very far down the spiritual path without some sort of meditation practice. I'm not saying that the meditation practice that I teach is necessarily the best one or the only one. It's a very wide term. But having that awareness as a leader, right, is going to be necessary for us to realize, hey, if I stress people out, they're not getting their work done. And if you are one of those folks who is in a difficult environment where there is a lot of stress and there is a lot of pressure, meditation will begin to take the edge off. It will make it easier for you to perform. And I think in a very cynical way, this is why meditation and mindfulness is being taught in corporate environments. Not for spiritual growth, but because it will calm people down so they can get more work done. I think it improves quality of life as well, so I'm happy to be part of that system, knowing full well that that's not what it was intended for. But it does work for that, and it will improve your quality of life. So that's one. Second benefit. How many of you have heard of 3 levels of listening? 3 levels of listening. Okay. Okay, so the first level of listening is where you're hearing the words coming out of my mouth. But actually what you're really listening to is your internal thought monologue of, what does he mean? Like, you're listening to your thoughts or what you're going to say next more than you are to me. And we do that all of the time. It is I would say, our default mode of listening. Now, if you go to coactive coaching or you go to take Alyssa Atkins' Coaching Agile Teams class, they're going to tell you, well, there's 2 more levels of listening. And if you're not at least at the next level of listening, which is level 2 listening, you're not an effective coach. Right? And so level 2 listening is where I'm listening to the words that you're saying and I'm really paying attention to just you. If there are thoughts arising in my head that kind of arise and pass away, but my main focus is on you. Level 3 is like that, but more so. So as I'm listening to you, but I also have this bright, open, expansive awareness of what's happening in the room. So I'm listening to you, but I can hear the plates and I can feel that it's cool and there's my phone breathing. And so there's this open, expansive awareness of what's happening in the room. And I think that we need that as coaches. Now, simply by being aware of these 3 levels of listening, does this empower you to actually listen in this way? No. Right? And so I think that was one of the things that was really frustrating. It's like, well, it could be really great if you could just jump from a static thing and touch the rim and dunk the basketball. I'm like, yeah, that would be nice, but actually I need to learn how to jump. I need to build up that muscle, right? And so I'm about to share something with you that is a secret of meditation that you've probably never heard before. And I think it'll rock your world once you understand it. Most meditation instruction will tell you to focus on your breath at the exclusion of everything else. And when you lose that exclusive attention to your breath, to just bring it back. That is virtually guaranteed to doom you to failure. And I believe this so strongly that I'm actually willing to actually make that claim. The reason for that is that your brain operates in 2 modes simultaneously. And I'll give you a visual analogy. Right now, your eyesight focused laser attention is on my eyes. But you also see my hands moving. You're not counting how many fingers I have. All of your attentional, analytical deconstruction capabilities on my eyes and on my face, right? That's where your detailed attention, your detailed vision is going. But you have this bright, open, objective awareness that's also happening simultaneously. So your brain has attention and awareness, similar to your focus and your peripheral vision. And it's that dynamic interplay of how they're working together that is mindfulness. It's your total cognitive power associated with attention and awareness playing together. If I am attempting to focus on my breath exclusively, it's a little bit like me staring George right in the eyes through this laser tube, and I can see George very, very, very clearly. But then there's this other thought coming in. And there's this thought that's threatening to ruin me about lunch. And here it comes. But I'm just focused on George, man. And this thought comes in. And here comes this thought, and here comes this thought, and here comes this thought. But I'm just focused. And the thought totally eclipses my field of attention. But because my field of attention is so narrow, I can't see it as it's happening. And then I'm just looking at my hand. I'm like, yeah, man, there's the hand, right? Because I didn't have the awareness that my object of attention changed. This is so significant. Because if you want to progress meditation, actually the way to start is not to think about your attention at all. You cannot maintain durable attention through attention. It's through that awareness that you do it. And so meditation will help you develop that awareness. So when I'm listening to you, right, yes, my attention is on the words, right? But there's this awareness that's like, hey, Chris, where's that bright laser beam of your attention pointed? Oh, your attention's back to your thoughts. Well, that's not very useful. You're having a really crucial conversation with George. Bring it back to George. It's the awareness. So when you sit down to meditate, don't drown out everything else. Keep that awareness open. Listen to the sounds. Don't put earplugs in. Like, as you hear the siren go by, like focus on your breath, yes, but hear just the bare woo, woo, woo. You don't even have to call it siren. You can just hear the sounds echoing through your minds as you're still focusing on your breath because you're focused on that awareness. That awareness is giving you that ability to focus. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, so the third benefit of meditation and mindfulness at work. There's a really interesting model of conflict. So raise your hand if you think that conflict is universally bad. We don't want conflict. Well, we try to trick them. We go. You don't want conflict? What's that? I don't want conflict. You don't want conflict. Okay, so we got one person who's like, I don't want conflict. Yeah, most of us, I think, are conflict adverse.
Thrive in conflict.
You thrive in conflict. Well, there's really a few different kinds of conflict. There's a couple axes that I want you to consider. So the first axis is passive versus active conflict, right? So I'm like, screw you, and you're desire not to have conflict. That would be an example of active conflict, right? Or if I just simply ignore you and I kind of tune you out and I kind of go into my own little world, right? That's like that silence versus the violence, right? Those are both examples of that's an active or a passive, destructive conflict. It's an emotional conflict, right? So I'm like, screw you, right? Or just kind of tuning you out. That's a destructive, emotional conflict. But on the flip side, there is a cognitive, constructive conflict, right? If you can say, gosh, I really value where you're coming from. That's a really, really great viewpoint. I want you to keep bringing it out, right? And my viewpoint's different, but that's totally okay. It's through working together that we understand our viewpoints, that we can understand and come up with the situation that works well for us, right? That might be an active form of constructive conflict of like, hey, I really want to pull out your viewpoint so we can get everybody's viewpoint on the table and together pick through them and learn what we can from all of them. Or maybe a passive constructive conflict is noticing that I'm getting like really annoyed with you and just keeping my mouth shut because I recognize that I don't have anything valuable to add. Or, so there are different ways of looking at this. So there are passive, active, destructive, constructive conflict, cognitive versus emotional. Now that emotional conflict occurs when your amygdala gets hijacked. Does anyone have a sense of what I mean when I say amygdala hijack? Can you relate to that at some point in your career? I know I can.
When you see red.
Yeah, right?
You see black.
Or when you see black, right? Or like whatever it is, it's like you're like, right? The emotion takes over, right? And your emotions are so strong that lizard part of your brain, that flight or flight response is like, nope, right? You're going to tell your boss to just, right? And that's not going to help you. So meditation and mindfulness do two beautiful things. It turns out that in just 8 weeks of reasonably disciplined, well-instructed meditation practice, your amygdala literally shrinks in physical volume inside of the cavity of your skull. Your amygdala literally gets smaller. Your prefrontal cortex, which is that, the opposite of the lizard brain, literally gets thicker. Like, we actually have fMRI studies that show that this is the case. So at a very basic level, when you sit, when you practice mindfulness, you're going to get less likely to get triggered because your amygdala is getting smaller, but you're also more likely to notice it because you have that awareness. Yes, I'm paying attention to my interactions with Lydia. I can see that there's that attention there, right? But then I have this awareness of all my other emotions. And maybe I get in a fight with Lydia, right? And the attention is all about that fight, right? Like, I hate Brussels sprouts, right? But the awareness is like, whoa, your friendship with Lydia is more important than you're expressing your anger about Brussels sprouts. You want to cool it a bit. Right? I might say, hey, I'm feeling a lot of strong emotions. Do you mind if I go take a walk around the block, right? So initially, mindfulness gives you that very quickly. It's like this beginner's luck. You seriously practice for 2 months solid with a dedicated daily practice, you will have that superpower. I'm virtually certain of it. But if you take meditation, you take mindfulness as more than just being just sort of this thing about relaxation or not getting stressed out at work, it goes far, 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 far deeper. Far deeper. And along the way, one of the benefits is you start going deep into your own psyche. And at the end of this meditation journey, your whole psyche can literally unify. That if you say, I want to place my focus on the breath, my whole brain is just saying focus on the breath, like moving in this direction. It's like a bunch of horses on a chariot, and we're all in agreement that we're moving in this direction. But in the process of getting them there, I've got this part of my brain that's like still acting like a temper tantrum 5-year-old because I had a traumatic childhood, right? And I can then, as part of this meditation practice, my brain is going to expand from this little nugget of like, focus on the breath, focus on the breath. This part tries to distract me, but focus on the breath, focus on the breath. And eventually, I have to begin to touch every part of my brain with this desire to pay attention to the object of meditation, pay attention to my breath. And in so doing, I come face to face with all of my demons, with all of my shadow side. And I'm faced with the choice of, do I work through it? Do I stand up to that sense of panic, that anxiety, that sense of anger, that sense of fear, pain, suffering? And just like, it's all just clouds floating by in the sky. I can ignore it and focus on my breath. Or if it becomes so strong that I look for the sensations in my body and I feel it objectively. Oh there's this anxiety, but it's just like I feel it in my throat and there's this throbbing. It's about the size of a walnut. No, maybe the size of a tennis ball. Yeah, okay. Back to the breath. And you do that long enough and these things just evaporate. They get a new job. They're no longer the 5-year-old part of our brain that's all triggered when somebody says something nasty to me at work, right? Like, we all have this conditioning. Meditation can allow you to bust through this conditioning and to live a life that you want rather than the one that's controlled by whatever pockets of unprocessed trauma and issues we all have. So those are the 3 key benefits of mindfulness at work. They allow us to calm us down, to allow us to develop our performance. They allow us to become better listeners. And they allow us to engage in more constructive rather than destructive conflict because we're aware of when we're hijacked at a minimum, and we can take a time out to calm ourselves down and then re-enter that conflict with a little bit more grounding and a little bit less amygdala hijack. But then because if we actually take it to its logical conclusion, it effectively purifies us of the traumas and the landmines that will impact our relationships. And I literally could not do my job as a coach now if it weren't for the 4 years of practice that I've done over the last 4. I literally would not have the emotional intelligence, the resilience to do it. And I say that with great humility. So that's what I got for you. I have a handout that kind of just goes through what I've just described. I also have a handout available on sort of initial introductions to meditation. I come from a pragmatic Buddhist tradition. It's not, to me, a religion. There is a world religion called Buddhism. More power to them. That's not what I'm doing. It's more for me of a philosophy and practice. So for me, there's no question of conversion because it's not a faith. But I offer a weekly at my home in the Dog Patch every Monday night at 7 p.m. We get together, we listen to teachings together, we discuss, we meditate. You're more than welcome to join us. If you have an interest in learning how to meditation, I can teach you. I've been authorized and qualified to teach, and like I said, the skills that I've developed myself, I can teach about 90% of the population before I say, okay, you need to go to someone who knows a little more than I do. So, thank you. Any questions with my minute left?
This way.
We still have a few minutes left, so do you have any questions for Chris?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I actually have two questions. The first question is, first of all, I also like do some kind of mindfulness practices. And like lots of my friends, I tell them, I say like it's very beneficial. And what I often encounter is kind of resistance against like this kind of mindfulness and woo-woo, whatever spiritual thing, what they call it.
Mm-hmm.
And they say stuff like, I don't know, like, oh, I do sports. This helps me to deal with stress.
Yeah.
I do whatever to deal with my stress. I have something else. You know?
Yeah.
So, well, how do you deal with like this kind of resistance? Because I also like kind of want to spread the word about how this can be beneficial to everybody's life.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
I mean, if they're seeking to reduce their stress and playing sports reduces their stress, you don't have a way of solving their problem. They've already found a solution, right? So for me, that's why I stress that meditation to me, you know, the Olympic athlete in their greatest moment of flow, right? Just like that absolute moment of just like this sense of them and their skis or the surgeon, like that's like not even scratching the surface of what's possible. It's just a straight up dedicated practice. But I think we have to be really careful not to get into toxic evangelism, right? That if somebody's stressed out and they found a cure for that stress by, you know, going and doing a bunch of hard sports, like, great. I think that there is more to meditation than just like clearing your mind and relaxing, which is why I put that out there. The other thing that I can offer is I think another reason why people struggle with sitting is because they say like, oh, I'm defective, I can't sit. Like 95% of the people that I offer to are like, I'm defective, I can't sit. I try to sit down and like my attention disappears within like 3 seconds. I'm like a goldfish. Actually, goldfishes have longer attention spans than most people intact now, right? But my point is that like, how many people here could play a harp convincingly well?
Sorry?
How many people can play a harp convincingly well? But do you believe that if you sat down and practiced harp, that you could get reasonably good at it?
It's the belief. It's your belief.
Right.
It's, as you said, like
Right.
willingness to be aware.
Correct.
And it's your belief.
Right. So that to me is the only element of faith that's required in this path. It's the faith to know that if you simply sit down and practice, you will improve. That's it. Right? I mean, in 20 hours of sitting, you will improve. If you put 20 hours learning how to play the ukulele, you'll actually get reasonably decent at it. You'll be like, oh, I'm not a complete beginner at the ukulele, not a complete beginner at the harp. So it doesn't matter. Everyone says, I can't meditate. But if you put 20 hours of practice into it, you'll surprise yourself with what you're capable of.
Not to judge it. Because
Yeah.
I've had friends, like, I pushed them, hey, you gotta
Yeah.
do meditation. And they were like, okay, I'll do it.
Yes, that's
They wanted to judge. And they were like, hey, I did 20 days. Nothing was
right.
changed.
Yeah, and I want to be mindful of the time, but that's actually another really great point, which is that when you sit, when you recognize your mind has been wandering, this is another really key salient point. When you recognize your mind has been wandering, don't beat yourself up, especially but actually you want to give it a yes. Why? Because that's the moment that your brain did what you wanted it to do. So if you give it positive reinforcement, it's going to keep doing more of that. Like, this is such a major point. No one teaches it, and it drives me crazy. When you recognize your mind has been wandering, it stopped wandering. It started wandering like 5 minutes ago, right? It's like coming home and like your dog has made a pile on the rug. And you're like, that's not going to work because the dog did that like 5 hours ago, right? Well, it's the same with your brain. Like negative reinforcement, when your brain is recognized, my mind's been wandering. No, positive reinforcement. It's going to make it more fun. If you strive too much, you're going to fail. And we know this in other avenues, right? Like if you're at a piano, you're like, I got to play the piano really hard, right? Like you're going to suck forever, right? Because there's too much tension to perform well, right? Remember that YerkesDodson thing? It's like this little sweet spot.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any others?
And a second question.
Yeah, you want to go for it?
Oh yeah. So what you said was like the anchor of like focusing on your breath
Yes.
is kind of BS.
Well,
Reminder.
the anchor focusing on the breath is BS.
Yeah, like it's
Let me-
not very helpful for teaching meditation.
Let me clarify that. So you will be focusing on your breath, but it's not.
Yeah, like
You
two
both.
kinds of, like you have like the laser focus and you have the awareness on the side.
It's both simultaneously. So you're looking at me, right? That's the attention, as if the breath, right? But you still have this peripheral awareness. So as you're focusing on your breath, don't do it so rigidly that that's all you've got. That you're open to.
So like my question is I mean, it's totally like I get what you mean.
Uh-huh.
It makes lots of sense, and I think people will get automatically to this point that they get it, that they will see that it's not about the laser focus on an attention thing. What I think is maybe why like people start teaching it like this is because people get more confident they can do it. Because if you just say focus on your breath, it seems straightforward. If you say focus on your breath, but also do like get awareness of the room,
Yep.
like people get like, oh god, okay, that's too complicated. I can't do it.
Yeah.
Also, my question is like, how do you teach it so it doesn't get like people overwhelmed and seems too complicated?
It really is a distinction that I think is unique to this and maybe just a couple other lineages. It really is not something that I think a lot of teachers are talking about. And I know this because I'm in a class with many different teachers and we're all sharing how we've learned from other teachers. And the fact that there is this distinction between attention and awareness really is actually a notable contribution from this lineage. And I've seen it I've heard of it, like somebody says it was in Shambhala as well, but you're not going to see it everywhere. And where most people wind up when they just focus on the breath is they just get really frustrated because they can't and they quit. Or they wind up in a place that we call stable, subtle dullness, where if you sit down, you don't have a lot of awareness kind of brightening up your mind, you're just focused on the breath. And what happens is your mind gets really kind of dull and tired and sleepy, but it also feels really good, like having a drink or smoking something, right? Like you get this kind of this dullness, this drowsiness, and it feels really good. It wouldn't feel like you could mistake it for a high state of meditation because you're really kind of focused on your breath. Well, the reason why you're focused on your breath is because your brain is so quiet because it's about to fall asleep that it's not presenting anything to compete with the breath. So your energy level is really low. You can kind of coast it and ride it, but that's a dead end. And it feels good, and if all you're trying to do is relax, and more power to you, but the vast majority of people who don't get proper instruction around this wind up in a dead end. And it's actually one of the reasons why if you go to like a Goenka retreat, like the Vipassana retreats, why they just teach Vipassana, they don't teach any of the shamatha, that breath following, because they don't want you to get stuck in that dead end. Yes, please.
Could you keep in your mind because we have more and after that we still have time. That works.
Network.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.